Welcome back, gentlemen. It's GOATQuest's part 2 of the feature episode on the KRONK Gym, the greatest fight team, the greatest boxing gym of all time. Of course, the KRONK Gym in Detroit, Michigan. So I'm gonna mention a few of the heirlooms here that I have brought in before I introduce KRONK's new CEO, because he's seated next to them. And what you're seeing here is a brick from the original 5555 McGraw Street Gym. I received this as a KRONK patronage award. I was very, very honored. It's probably the greatest keepsake that I have in my life, not just because it symbolizes my friendship with Emmanuel, but because the other honorees that night were Roger Penske, Sugar Ray Leonard, Vladimir Klitschko. I mean, I'll never be on a list like that again. So I thank Emmanuel greatly from his place in heaven for having included me in that. And it's just so symbolic of the grassroots of what it means to be a Detroiter. And that's the event there next to it with the KRONK Gym program from that night from the event. The glove is a special little story. I gave Emmanuel 2 gloves to sign. Hopefully I make through this without the waterworks. He signed one of them and had Tommy sign it, and we gave it away to an auction at my church. And the second one, he said, I want to get a few signatures on this. He passed away before he had the opportunity to get the second one signed. So I kept the second glove. I always keep it as a reminder. He's looking out for us and he's looking over us. And that's a great blessing to have when you're starting anew and refreshing the brand of the KRONK Gym, as John Lepak and Paul Bhatti are doing. So Paul, please introduce yourself and tell us, as I mentioned in your intro, why you have such a funny accent.
Thank you, Joe. Well, thank you for having us. It's been great to hear the first segment of the show. Paul Bhatti, born and raised in Manchester, England, Joe. That's the excuse for my accent. And I sound very English in these headphones, I have to say. I'm hearing my voice a lot more. It's actually, I'd love to whip them off, but I won't. But yeah, that's the accent. That's where I'm born and raised.
KRONK has such a rich history in the UK, not just with Lennox Lewis as one of the greatest champions, and that's kind of the point in this journey through the KRONK history that we're at already. So it's a great segue to have you come in. But the city of Manchester has gone through a rebirth, much like what the city of Detroit is trying to do. Manchester all of a sudden is a cosmopolitan, sporting, arts and culture city, and Detroit wants to embody that same spirit in the future. Do you see what you're doing with KRONK as a rung on the ladder to that success?
Very much so. And having represented both sides, and obviously grew up in Manchester, been in Detroit, Michigan for 17 going on 18 years, there's a lot of similarities between both the places. Manchester, very resilient, spirit, grit, directness, always make things work. The same spirit and mentality I found in Detroit, which is why I felt it was like home when we got here back in 2007. A lot of similarities.
And how did you start a passion for boxing from Manchester? And when did you get acquainted with what the KRONK Gym brand meant?
So I grew up with my dad being a massive boxing fan, a huge Muhammad Ali fan. And the first recollection I have was about 7 years old, watching my dad watch Muhammad Ali unfortunately getting beaten up by Larry Holmes in 1980. He's just on the ropes for 10 rounds, getting smashed up. The fight was on like 3-day delay. He already knew the result. I just watched it with him. And that was the first time I saw my dad cry. The first time I saw him break down. So that really captured me as a 7-year-old. And I realized it was his love for Muhammad and his love for that sport. So that really was the trigger for me. And ever since then, became a massive Muhammad Ali collector. I'm fortunate to have a lot of his memorabilia, a lot of the magazines and film, the 8mm film that my dad collected on him, I now have safely here, all fully insured and in the cloud as well. So I've got a lot of old fights. But that's what started the love for me with boxing.
And being that we're about the same age, I have to assume that the Four Kings fights, right? I mean, the world of Sugar Ray, Hagler, Hearns, Tommy the Hitman Hearns introduced you to KRONK like so many others?
Absolutely. So I used to love Sugar Ray, but who didn't? As everyone had that global appeal for Muhammad as well. Watched all the Four Kings. That was right in my age group, growing up through that. And obviously the rest of the Mike Tyson career. But Tommy, I had a picture of him on my bedroom wall, which this whole thing for me is just extremely surreal. And my good friend and partner, John, has always said to me since I've got to know him the last 40 months or so, always be that fan. don't lose that passion. And that's exactly what I'm going to be doing, because even when you just said earlier, the CEO of KRONK, I don't know how I'm sat here. This is very surreal for me.
Yeah.
And an absolute honor.
Well, I think it's a testimony to two things. I think one, it's that appeal that Hilmer was talking about in the beginning, that when you saw a KRONK fight and you saw a KRONK fighter, you knew you were going to get a maximum effort, right? And that's the same, that allure is the same for a kid in Manchester watching Tommy Hearns, right? The best 3 rounds in boxing history might be the 3 rounds, that ended in a loss for him with Marvin Hagler. But that kind of spirit probably draws anybody in from any walk of life. And then the second point being that when you come to a country and you're trying to make it for yourself, you've got to have some gutty determination to get through and learn the process. So you're not coming to this from a holier than thou standpoint, right? I've got a great history in boxing. You're learning as you go. And sometimes people who are learning as you go are more invested in the process.
Absolutely. And for me, it's always been about taking that calculated risk. And I feel if you do get thrown in at the deep end, you sink or swim. With my wife and I moving out here with 2 young children back in 2007, we were on our own. We left 2 good-sized families, that lots of support around us, and we came here on our own and we made it work. So I've always had that attitude to go for it. And when I'm sat, listening to the first part today with Hilmer, John, and Third, I can't speak like these guys speak. They're from it. They lived it. And for me, I'm just so in awe of all the stories and the history they've got. But not only in awe, completely respectful of it and understanding what that brand means to them, what it means to me, and how we're going to serve the public as we bring it back.
That's great. And John, I have CEO and COO of the new KRONK Gym. John, give me the lineup for what you see as the benchmarks of achievement. What milestones are we going to see here in the near future as this rebrand materializes?
It's a great question. I'll say this, starting at the foundation, just like Emmanuel preached about the basics of boxing. When you get in trouble, you go back to the basics. You can't win the big ones without the basics. So we started at the basics. And what I mean by that is at the foundation, bringing the right people together. And I can get into a little story about how I got this guy in and share with you a special Emmanuel moment of my own I had. But it was for me first reuniting the family, getting Hilmer back, getting Third back in there. We want to reach out again, to the Jonathan Banks, Sugar Hills, get a lot of the old champions involved, and at least let everybody know the door's open for you. And then what I was able to see through the course of time, where a lot of mistakes were made that led to some of the downfalls of KRONK. So I knew then we had to assemble the right team, and it starts with leadership, and that's where Paul does a tremendous job. Despite, he'll say, I didn't grow up, I wasn't a part of it. He is a part of it. He's adopted. He's one of us now. And, I would say that benchmarks, Paul and I have shared a lot about this, and we don't want to give too much away, but obviously returning the brand to Detroit. We want to honor Emmanuel's legacy. We want to continue what he started, where he left off. But the blueprint is there, so there's no need to reinvent the wheel. But we obviously are working on a lot of things coming up. By the time this airs, we'll have a new website, new merch site. That's just phase 1. We want to provide a lot of support for the fighters growing up so the fighters can avoid the pitfalls as well. Not just the business of KRONK, but that means the KRONK community, the KRONK family. So starting with a solid amateur program, making sure these kids have what they need, they're taken care of. They can go on not just local, national, but international travel, get to experience different cultures, and then we want to turn those fighters professional eventually. And if they don't turn professional, we want to make sure they have the support systems in place to where there's life after boxing.
Mm-hmm. Hilmer Kinty is one of the great examples of that. I mentioned it, not only is he a great gentleman of the sport and ambassador, but went on to his own successes outside of the ring. Hilmer, as the first KRONK champion, what would you like to see these gentlemen do with the KRONK rebrand? What would make you proud of a rebirth of the KRONK Gym?
I'll tell you just what John just stated. I mean, the agenda that they have for this KRONK organization is excellent. I mean, that's exactly what I would like to see. I think there are several things that you can do, which is what they are doing right now in order to reestablish the KRONK brand, to reestablish the KRONK boxing team, and actually bring up some really good fighters in this area, which is, I think, what we'd like to see.
Yeah, so Paul, I'm going to use this segue, you being from the UK, to kind of set the stage for at where we are in the journey of the KRONK Gym if we're telling the story. At this point, when there's some legal trouble, when there's some financial trouble, Emmanuel sees the opportunity, and I hate when people use this pejoratively, where he can be a hired gun. I don't look at hired gun as a bad thing, because you have to be pretty damn good for somebody to want to hire you, to be the gun that corrects a situation for a fighter and puts them in a good position to win. And a lot of that hired gun exploitation happened on the international stage, right? It happened in the UK. Oliver McCall, John, this plays into your area, but first Dennis Andrews was the first fighter who came here to Detroit and fought as a true KRONK fighter from the UK. But you've got Oliver McCall. Obviously, Lennox Lewis wins one of the most storied careers of all time. His only losses he avenged in the ring and beat the fighters who beat him. So from that standpoint, he beat everybody that he could face. A tremendous accomplishment in the fight game. And then you've got guys who at the lower divisions, which Emmanuel loved, right? Because he was that lightweight that didn't get much run. Guys like Prince Nassim Hamed, who came on the scene and had these vigilant careers, these careers where they weren't always the most mild-mannered. Maybe they were taunting a little bit, but in the same regard, that showmanship kind of extended itself. So tell me a little bit about growing up in the UK and seeing this happen as a young adult at that point, where all of a sudden Emmanuel Stewart is working guys out in London. And John, from your standpoint of, okay, he's working guys out all over the place, but we got to come back home, and there's a little bit of struggle there.
Yeah, I have to be honest, Joe, from my perspective looking in, although now I know why, you didn't know any different. It was KRONK expansion. There was gyms all over the world, and Emmanuel was going there training people. I think it was quite remiss from the fans. You didn't think there's some demise happening here, or he's not got the gym anymore with a stable. He's gone that famous and successful with the local talent. He's taken that to different geographies in the world. So I didn't really have much thought about that.
Showtime and HBO probably helped, right? The fact that he became the face of color analyst at the Showtime network, and then at HBO with Jim Lampley and Larry Merchant, and what a great, amazing Emmy award-winning job that crew did of bringing boxing to light. You're right. It probably, from most onlookers' standpoint, didn't feel like the KRONK brand had changed at all, but living it might have been different.
It was very different. Like I said, upon graduating from high school, Emmanuel brought me in. I was still working with Bill at the Palace at the promotions. It was interesting because there was a divorce that had taken part in the KRONK family on the business side. And I was one of maybe the only person that traveled back and forth, almost like a child between both parents, where I would coordinate fights for Bill as a promotional coordinator. And then at that point, basically living with Emmanuel. I became Emmanuel's assistant and then office/business manager to a degree. But to be more detailed on the KRONK side, honestly, Joe, it's no secret. It was just shut-off notices. It was red notices. It was past due amounts. And we were living fight to fight. And, Emmanuel couldn't stand the term the hired gun. I don't know where it came from, but Emmanuel was a KRONK guy. He wanted to be in that basement. So no matter where we were in the world, Emmanuel he had that itch he couldn't scratch that only being in that basement could. He had to get back to that basement. But during that time, unfortunately, around the 92, 93, Gerald McClellan was the last fighter at that time to win a world championship in the gold trunks. And then Gerald followed a few of the other guys and parted ways, went with Don King. And unfortunately, we know what happened there, but we're excited. We can also talk about maybe the next time around some things we're doing with Gerald's sister to support Gerald.
For those who don't know, Gerald McClellan had a traumatic brain injury in the ring and has not fully recovered from that injury. So he is to some degree incapacitated. And we'll just leave it at that.
So back to that time frame. So coming out of the 92 Olympics was I'd probably say the last really. Well, 96, but 92 was a really good class for the U.S. Oscar De La Hoya probably leading the front. But Donnell Nicholson had came up from Chicago and trained with us. But the gym was really light. We had Michael Clark, a lightweight from Columbus, Ohio, who Hilmer worked with as well. We had a few of the holdover guys from the last KRONK generation, if you will. But Emmanuel had to take the show on the road. And
there was a lot of controversies, right? I mean, Michael Moore,
Michael was gone at that point.
Had moved on. James Toney, whether or not he was going to come in. And then, of course, there's the back and forth on Jackie Kalin. I don't want to cast aspersions on Jackie Kalin. Obviously, her and Emmanuel didn't see eye to eye all the time, but Emmanuel didn't see eye to eye with a lot of people that he ended up coming back into the good graces of. I know Jackie, definitely tried to pay her respects and has done, work in the community to promote Emmanuel's legacy, which I'm sure Emmanuel appreciates. But there was certainly a time when there were a lot of adversaries in Emmanuel's life.
Absolutely, and I think boxing breeds that, though. It's like, look at Don King and Bob Arum, arch rivals, couldn't stand each other, but they would come together for the sake of doing business. And that's often the way it is in boxing. We could be involved in a lawsuit between two other fighters, but we're doing a promotion this weekend featuring two other fighters, and we're about to make millions of dollars potentially, all of us together.
And it's also worth noting that Bob Arum showed up for the funeral. A billionaire, promoter, doesn't have to stop his career to fly in for someone whom he had a very well-known rivalry with. He did that because he had such deep respect.
Yeah, one thing I did want to say, when you have the type of success that the KRONK established, and you have that type of success so fast, I think it's easy to have those type of problems that the KRONK organization had. I mean, I don't think that would happen. I think that would happen with any organization that grew as fast as it did. And not only that, you basically had one individual at the helm of the entire thing. It wasn't like you had a president, vice president, and several other officers of that organization. It was pretty much Emmanuel Stewart.
Who didn't like to give up control to other people very often.
But I think the reason why he didn't like to give up control because he had an idea of how it should be done. And I think he was the best person for that particular job. I don't think anybody will be able to do, I don't think you'll ever see anyone able to do what Emmanuel Stewart did. And I'm just being honest about it. Like I said, he and I had some differences. There's no question about that. But you cannot deny the things that he did.
Yeah. It's like people, criticizing Michael Jordan's career or criticizing Tom Brady's career. You're always going to find some chinks in the armor, but you're criticizing the best who's ever done it. And that's definitely Emmanuel Stewart's class of humanity.
And
No
to
question
some of those faults that we were speaking of, they rubbed off on me, those same chinks in that armor. And so that's why I'm very grateful to have Paul in my life, not just as a business partner, but as a friend. We spend a lot of hours on the phone, late nights, talking about family and sometimes talking each other off the ledge when we've had a rough go at it that day. But it's just beautiful, though, that we have that family component back in KRONK, and I'm just grateful for Paul's involvement.
Well, here's the good news. The good news is that no matter how it came into being, this diaspora out into the international ranks that Emmanuel went through later in his career when troubles and financial scenarios might have been too hot at home. The good news is that expansion, as Emmanuel put it to me several times, led to the point where he was getting recognized more in international airports than he was in anywhere in the United States other than Detroit. So the KRONK brand is out there on the tips of fight fans' tongues all over the world. It's not just North America, right? It's not just all the great Mexican fighters that he trained. It's not just the Latin American influence that he had in Puerto Rico and other places. It's also all the way down in South Africa. Remember, Welcome Nsita was one of his great fighters in that international area, all the way up in Norway with Ole Kametsen. We mentioned the UK fighters, but there's also an Italian-German fighter who preceded the Klitschko brothers, Rocky, Graziano Raccagiani, who again, unfortunately passed. May he rest in peace. When you look at all of these fighters, many of whom, Jeff Fennick,
absolutely,
three-time world champion from Australia, many times these were the only world champion fighters ever from their country.
Right.
And Emmanuel was the guy who trained them.
Right. And remember, Emmanuel wasn't just a trainer. he was also the manager. He was managing a lot of these guys too. And when you start talking about managing, he also determines who they fight, when you might fight that particular person. So all of that just shows how much knowledge Emanuel Stewart had, not only about boxing, but about the business of boxing.
Hilmer, thank you for bringing that up, because that's something I wanted to touch on today. That Emanuel is often recognized as this Hall of Fame trainer. He was a Hall of Fame manager. Emanuel was a brilliant manager. And you don't get all those great fighters just from training in the gym. There's a lot of business that goes on outside the ring before it becomes a sport.
It's a good point, and there's going to be a lot of business done at the KRONK Gym here in the future in Detroit. I'm just getting an inkling of it as I talk to you guys. I'm so excited about the professionalism that you're bringing to the brand. Do you see, and I'm not asking you for a timeline, but do you see in what we would call the collective near future, for me, near future is within a year. In the near future, are we going to see a KRONK promotion live in the world of the fight game?
Well,
I'll be bold. Yes, we will.
We will see something. I don't care if it's amateur or pro, a promotion where I can go see young men wear the gold trunks. That would give me such a rush of enthusiasm.
Joe, that's the burning goal for us all. When I got introduced to this process and fortunately met John, and thank you for the kind words, brother, but I'm happy you're in my life as well.
Thank you, brother.
But when I met him and we spoke about this and the other people we're going to bring in to acquire the business from the Stewart family, that was the goal. We want to see that gold and red back in the ring. You know, and as I said at one of my investment meetings, trying to get money to buy the business, I said a comment about being a lad from Manchester. There's actually two clubs in Manchester. There's Manchester United and this team that plays in blue. I don't want to talk too much about them, but I said it's like not having Manchester United in Manchester is exactly like not having KRONK in Detroit. It's sacrilege. It's wrong. It's happened. We have to just look forward, and we're going to bring it back. And one of the most important things I've always stated to the team as we went through this process, it's wonderful that we're the group bringing this back, but we're not going to be the group that screws it up. So we take our time, we plan methodically, we do the right things, objective-based, understand what resources we have, what time do we have, what return of investment will be on certain initiatives, and we do this right. Because KRONK should never be going away again. The other 4 franchises have, propelled and furthered themselves in Detroit. KRONK fell away. Not again. So, yes, we will have a bill at some point.
That is great news. There's a lot of leadership, right? You've got a guy right next to you who's an amazing ambassador to KRONK Gym as the first world champion in Hilmer Kinty. Jonathan Banks, who had an IBO title, is around as a trainer of a champion with Klitschko, who Emanuel handpicked to train Klitschko. You've got a guy, if we follow the lineal heavyweight championship all the way to Tyson Fury, who recently lost it. I'm sure we'll get a chance to try to get that belt back. But Tyson Fury, trained by the nephew of Emanuel, Javen Sugar Hill Stewart. There's a lot of guys who still have a lot of knowledge about the fight game. The sweet science is still alive and well in the brains of Detroit people. How are you guys going to manage that? I mean, I'm sure in a perfect world, I was there when Javen had to literally run around and do Emanuel's bidding when Emanuel had 5 other things going on. So I really feel for Javen, given all that he put up with during a tumultuous era to come through that. I also have that same feeling for Jonathan, watching Jonathan Banks go through some tough times where he wasn't getting probably all the attention he wanted because there were so many competing priorities. But Emanuel's just one guy, right? And the fact that he kept contributing to all of their careers shows how much he felt about them. Are you guys going to encourage all of them to come back on their own terms, right? Yeah, I'm sure you're not going to force people. You're the only one that's going to train fighters here. How are you going to deal with all of the egos and all of the great trainers that are the stable of Emanuel Stewart?
I'll open it up. I'll say this, that behind Emanuel Stewart, we talked about it briefly, but we were speaking about it at lunch a little more in detail. Emanuel had an amazing support system behind him. He had Walter Smith. He had Mr. Miller at one time. He had Luther Burgess. He had Mr. Logan. He
Lane
had
Combs.
Sammy Poe. Now
Ernest
that's on,
Bird.
that. Now, if we're going to segue in
Business
the
side,
business side, now, yeah, we've got Lane Combs, Sam LaFada, Dr. Lorenz, Prentice, Bill, Jackie. So again, there was a great team in place. So back to my point, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. And as I said, with Third being here with us today, that's my guy inside and outside the ring. But it's important for us to stay true to the root, true to the roots of KRONK. And there's only a handful of people out here that are really, in my humble opinion, capable of teaching the Emanuel Steward KRONK style of boxing. Just because you're a great fighter doesn't necessarily translate to becoming a great trainer, a great teacher, because even there's separations of the two. You could teach, but can you work that corner? Can you get that fighter to go and it's the 11th round and it's all on the line in the 12th? Can you bring it out of them and win that fight and bring it home? So this is where Third, your Javens, Jonathans, Andy Lees, these guys are very, very, very special in their own right.
And just further to that as well, as John and I have discussed, the door's wide open. I've been fortunate to meet Third, Hilmer, Milton at lunch last week as well, Milton McCrory. I chat with Jonathan. I've had a few calls with him. I've met Sugar a few times as a fan, not yet spoke to him on a business level, but we want them all involved in this. It's not, none of us are the last man here. We're wide open to all of it.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful perspective to take on it. I'm interested to get Hilmer's take on the right tool for the right job, because I think that's what Emanuel saw, right? Emanuel saw that the right trainer can make the right fighter, and the wrong trainer can really hurt a fighter, right? So you've got Third Chambers, who was kind enough to join us today. You've got Sugar Hill, Javen Stewart. You've got Andy Lee and Jonathan Banks, who have a lot of experience. Would you be open to a future where it's just the right tool for the right fighter? All of these guys are KRONK family trainers, and whomever ends up with the right fighter based on the fit is kind of the fighter's choice?
That's the ideal situation, but the realities are, again, people have established their own independent roads to success post Emanuel Steward. And so, I think in some situations it would be hard to maybe reunite everyone under a one unified roof. And I will say this, what I mean by that is people have their own fighters that they're training currently, like Third trains Jake and a few other fighters as well. So you don't want to take away someone's ability to earn and provide for their families and keep sharpening their tools. But if they can come back and contribute, and I want to turn it over to Hilmer in a second, but even having someone like Hilmer Kenty that's on home base for us, that's there, that you can count on, that knows the KRONK style, that knows how to teach, and that also has the business acumen and the leadership as well. So even, going down the line with having our former champions like Hilmer, hopefully Jimmy, Paul, Milton McCrory involved, it's one big family. I can't stress it enough.
Yeah, well, I won the championship back in 1980, so the atmosphere in boxing has changed considerably. So I think you do have to change the way you're doing things now. You can't do them exactly the way we did them back in 1980 or back when Emanuel Steward first started the KRONK organization. I think there's some changes that you have to make, and I think we have the right people at the helm to help us navigate this entire boxing road.
I think that, and this is just one man's opinion, the right mentorship, the right personality to be a role model for the KRONK Gym is Hilmer Kenty. I know that that's easy for me to say because we're in such close proximity. I met a lot of KRONK fighters, and they range all over the gamut of intellectual capability, of business acumen, of fight game knowledge. But being a gentleman is a very special skill set that we don't see that often in competitive athletics, and Hilmer represents that to the nth degree. So, I'm going to throw Hilmer's hat in the ring as the ambassador of the future.
I have to agree with you on that one.
As a great ambassador. But I want to take this conversation to the next step, which is now that we've kind of laid out this landscape of because in football we call this a coaching tree, right? Emanuel's got a tree, right? There's a tree of these great trainers. and many of them are now contributing to the health and well-being of other fighters' careers. Is there a future for what Emmanuel was trying to do with actually having that Scott program extend to being a branch for fighters after they're done with their careers and what they're going to do to repurpose their skill set and still be vital citizens?
Yeah, I think that's massively important. There's obviously the youth development side, but I think John touched on it earlier. Another element we want to bring into the fighters, no one needs telling around this table, it's the toughest sport in the world. Things can happen, bad things can happen. We want to make sure that a fighter under our management banner has got the tools and the knowledge to excel in life when the career is over. Bring them back in the house and be a trainer or ambassador. Also, they've got their own wealth because we'll set them up with wealth management training and a wealth management team that will help them with tax and things like that. The things you always read about with all the sports stars that earn the massive money getting paid gross, it's gone. And then they're fighting at 39, 40 for reasons other than fighting. It's purely to pay IRS, things like that. So we absolutely want to help as they get older, from the kids all the way through.
So that's a wonderful piece of the puzzle. I'm glad to hear you say that because so many of our heroes, so many of our legends struggle to kind of fit themselves back into the culture once the bright lights aren't shining so bright anymore and they are living in the real world, so to speak.
And let me just say this because I think a lot of the fighters that happens to is these are fighters that, they're coming out of high school, they don't have a lot of business knowledge, a lot of business acumen. What they've done all their life was boxing. And so once that boxing is over, what is next? And a lot of people don't plan for that. A lot of boxers, I guess I should say, a lot of us we just don't plan for that. So I just think I think that's where the KRONK organization can come in and help a lot of these fighters. I help a lot of these fighters all the way through their professional careers in preparing them for life after boxing, not once the boxing is over.
Go ahead, John.
Thank you. And to quote Bundini Brown, from the root to the fruit, I like to say. So to a point we came to earlier is it starts in the amateurs. And you get the kids young enough. And hopefully, I'm very confident to say that the blueprint's there. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can attract a lot of kids back to the sport of boxing that have since left to go play football or baseball, basketball, soccer these days, and in Detroit is coming up as well. But get these kids back interested and excited about boxing because, again, we're going to provide them with the opportunity to travel, to be, a part of almost student exchange programs to a degree. We've talked about a couple of things with some of our former champions. So even though, say, an Andy Lee is over in Ireland, but still I know bleeds the KRONK gold, I would love to see for our KRONK kids to go over and challenge some of Andy's kids or go over and challenge some of Lennox's kids. We've got to respond today to Lennox and his wife, actually, and that's one of the topics we're going to discuss. So we want to see all of our KRONK champions who have, again, left in like Tarek fights in Atlanta. Even though if they may not be back under the roof of the gym in Detroit, Third can grab a bunch of the guys, or Jonathan can grab some of the guys, and we can go down and we can have a fight with one of the old KRONK brothers. And it's all in good fun, and it's great for the kids.
Yeah, that's what a tree is, right? When the tree branches out, it expands.
And to add on to what John was saying, for me, it's all about values and the culture. And having been fortunate to have been in leadership for many years in my previous life working in IT, I've always led with people first. It's all about the people, not the clients, not the business you work for, it's the people. And if you look after the people, you empathize with them, you congratulate them, you steer them off the rough ground onto the right track, you build loyalty that's immeasurable. No course can give you that, nothing. It's pure leadership. And that's what we're going to be doing at KRONK. Every kid, every employee, every fighter will know we've got their back. And that gets paid back in spades. That's how you build the business.
That's a great way to end the KRONK Gym story here. But I'd be remiss if I didn't get the greatest of all time opinion, your Mount Rushmore from each of you. Okay, so it can be your favorite. It doesn't mean that this doesn't have to be an empirical analysis. You don't have to run it through any algorithm. I'm going to start out because it's a great segue for you guys talking about the business of the fight game. The one fighter who to me was just the unblemished excellence as an amateur, and I know he doesn't get favored very often as a professional, but I think that he fought in such a way that he could be massively successful without getting hurt, which is an accomplishment unto itself. To me, almost the perfect fighter and now a great businessman is Floyd Mayweather Jr. So I'm going to put Floyd Mayweather out there as the first face on my Mount Rushmore, and I'm going to kick it over to Hilmer.
Yeah, I mean, I really do. I have to agree with you on that. I mean, just think what he did. I mean, he made all of that money. Not only that, when he first turned pro, he understood that. I think he understood that business even before he turned pro, and understanding that he, as an Olympic champion or as one of the greatest fighters as an amateur, that he would be able to move into professional ranks without a manager. And basically keep most of that money himself, be his own manager. And not only that, he was able to map out his entire career all the way to several different championships. And I just think it was amazing what he did in the environment in which he did it.
Yeah. Who's your favorite fighter? Growing up, who would you have had a poster on your wall if you were into putting posters up on walls?
Without question, it would be Muhammad Ali. I mean, that was who I always wanted to be like, when I first saw him as a fighter. Of course. Yeah.
Rumble, young man, rumble.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, that's who I always wanted to be like, because he was a good-looking guy. He didn't get hit a lot, which is certainly what I wanted. I didn't want to get hit a lot. So he was certainly the person for me to look up to.
Paul?
Without any doubt, Muhammad Ali. He's the guy that got me into boxing via my dad's interest in him. He's someone that I studied greatly. I'm not going to recite his poems and put on his Louisville accent, not just yet. I need a few more Woodford reserves for that. But an absolute hero of mine and many millions around the world. And there was a documentary I watched on him out of the many, but one really resonated. It was called Skills, Brains and Guts. And that to me is the epitome of Muhammad Ali. Right. Inside and outside of the ring, just a giant. Before the advent of social media, his fame, unbelievable.
Yeah. What about KRONK? Your favorite KRONK fighter?
Tommy Hearns.
Yeah.
It has to be.
Yeah, I mean, volume of fights, showmanship, excellence, ring mastership. It was a career to be reckoned with.
Absolutely.
John?
I'm going to bring third in on the tail end after we make our final pick because I want to tie into third with that one. But my first pick would be Joe Louis because of what he did for society at the time when it was a different time back then.
18 years.
And
the greatest run in the history of the division.
I would say, though, what he did outside of the ring, more so than what he did in the ring. What he did in the ring was amazing and phenomenal. But if people really understood what was going on around the world, especially in America, with cultural, racial divides, poverty lines, and on the brink of World War II, and to go with the pressure that he had on his back, rematch Max Schmeling, it's historic. Number one on my list.
And more, just to go one little step into the abyss of trivia, Joe Louis is the only other sports star, and I'm using the other in air quotes here, to ever make the cut in a PGA Tour event. Did anyone know that?
Yes.
Wow.
Joe Louis, scratch golfer, San Diego Open. He made the cut with 141 strokes through the first two rounds.
Incredible.
Yeah.
That's my number one.
I'm going to come back around now, going up a weight class to Sugar Ray Robinson. I mean, you look at the numbers, and not just the numbers, but we talked about Lennox Lewis avenging losses. That was Sugar Ray Robinson too. If you beat him, it was probably you better be worried about the rematch because if you pissed him off by beating him, and a lot of times that was judging, right? A lot of people don't know this, but if you look back in Detroit history, Jake LaMotta from New York, Sugar Ray Robinson was born in Detroit, but then or was raised in Detroit until he was a youth, then moved to New York, but they actually switched where they fought as hometown fighters. LaMotta fought most of his fights in Detroit, a very big favorite of the East Side Italian families.
A little bit.
And then Sugar Ray Robinson having to fight him in many cases. People thought that LaMotta was getting the judge's card in many cases, and Sugar Ray Robinson even avenged those losses. So I'm gonna give it over to Hilmer for his last round here. One more fighter.
Agree with you on that. I just think Sugar Ray Robinson is he was way before his time. I mean, he was doing things back then that guys aren't doing nowadays, you know. And I agree with everybody. I mean, I think there's certainly some good fighters out there. I think I chose Muhammad Ali simply because of the fact of some of the other things that he stood for outside of boxing.
Yeah. Paul?
Sugar Ray Leonard.
Yeah.
Incredible. I used to love him as well.
Yep.
A lot of kind of the next Muhammad Ali, as it was, the flamboyance, very pretty. Him and Muhammad, great relationship, same trainer. But I used to love his fights as well, the speed, the agility. He had a lot of the retina issues, and he came back, beat Hagler, although that was very mixed in terms of what people think of that result. But just the pizzazz and everything around him, absolute showman, an impeccable fighter.
Yeah, he did lose the fight with Tommy Hearns.
Yes,
The
he
draw was a loss.
Correct.
I think he has actually gone on record now and admitted that he felt he lost that fight. For Detroiters, that was a very hard spot. But I agree with you. Technically, Sugar Ray Leonard, as good as any fighter of all time on the technical side. John?
My number 2, I'm going to stick to my theme. I'll go with Muhammad Ali because of what he did, not just for the sport, but what he did outside the ring and continued to do until his death. May he rest in peace. I mean, his funeral, say no more.
Yeah. I'm gonna finish it off, and I'll let you guys make final comments. My final comment, though, is the man who started it all to make boxing in America a fully embraced by all sport, and that is Jack Johnson. Right? When you look at what you want to talk about putting up with,
Oh, yeah.
with strife and indifference and volatile, Jack Johnson, and had the guts to do it with style. I mean, Jack Johnson was well known that, and he knew this, that he could be assassinated at any moment that he walked out into public. I mean, he was a feared man in all regards when you had one-on-one, but you know, there's a lot of things that can't stop a bullet. And it was a very real threat that Jack Johnson was going to be assassinated at public events. The way he spoke, right, was, you know, this is an African American who's not supposed to speak this way in public. He's not supposed to beat men this way in athletic competition. He beats Tommy Burns from Detroit to win the championship. And become the first African-American champion. But really, it's kind of like what we talk about in baseball and football and other sports on GOATQuest on this show. Until everyone is in the conversation, these old champions who just played with a bunch of white guys were really not being tested at the ultimate level, right? Until we all came together as a country and everybody got the same opportunities, that's when I think you can really declare who's the greatest of all time. And Jack Johnson starts that conversation.
Right. Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, he really was. He was just, I think seems like a tremendous individual. And to do the things that he did at the times in which he did them, I think that, to me, is the most glaring situation.
Paul and John, any other last ones you want to throw in there? Some of your favorites that didn't get mentioned?
I mean, my favorite, who I had the privilege of working with in all 3 training camps, Emmanuel trained him, was Julio Cesar Chavez. Chavez was a god in Mexico. There's no other way I could say it. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on Chavez and my experiences with Julio. And thank you, Julio, if you're listening, for continuing to support KRONK. And he's been a great, great friend and ally over the years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he gets forgotten a lot. 89 fights, was it, John?
Before his first draw.
Loss. And Mayweather, incredible, 50-0, with the last one being McGregor. But 89 fights, I'd have to agree, is right up there.
It's amazing. Fighter. I'm going to make one last mention because you guys jogged it. I know I said I was going to close out, but sometimes I just can't stop talking about the fight game. I love it. I love this. I love this topic of conversation so much. But we really were remiss in not mentioning the massive success that has been brought to both Germany and the troubled Ukraine right now with Vladimir Klitschko's success as heavyweight champion of the world and his brother Vitali's success before him to kind of set the ramp with Emmanuel. Multiple-time champion, another champion who also has a PhD. Talk about being able to go beyond the fight game. His brother Vitali is mayor of Kyiv right now in the middle of a war zone. I mean, talk about separating life and death from the fight game. I mean, these guys are on the front lines of a real war fighting for their freedom in the Ukraine. So a big shout out to the Klitschko brothers as kind of the last big emblems of the KRONK Gym internationally.
So I've got one more story. Can we bring Third in for a quick one?
Yeah, absolutely.
I finish my Mount Rushmore off.
And Third should also give us who his favorite fighter was if they haven't been
Get on
mentioned.
in here, champ. I got one for you.
I love Sugar Ray Robinson because that's someone that Emmanuel Stewart. I mean, like you say, he always watch a video. So me, Obakar, come guys, we used to always sit and watch Sugar Ray Robinson. How he threw his double, triple left hooks. You know how he used a jab, footwork, counter shots. Then if you was to listen to Ali, he always talked about Sugar Ray Robinson. If you listen to Leonard, they always talk about Sugar Ray Robinson. So I think that...
So the fighter's fighter was Sugar Ray Robinson.
Right, where he's basically set the tone. And then I think Muhammad Ali took it to a whole nother level because he liked to... talk, speak, and he had the
showmanship. It's part of the game.
Hey, and then I just think he took it and just went here. Then you had Leonard. I mean, he also took it, but he was a little more showboaty with his, but he was still hard puncher, grit, speed. So I like Robinson.
Got it, John.
So my last one is my man Mike. So when I left working for Emmanuel and KRONK, I continued to work for Bill as a promotional coordinator, and I also did a lot of freelance work as well. And so I was very fortunate to work for my other favorite fighter growing up as a kid in the game, and that was Mike Tyson. So I put Mike on there again because of what he did for the sport of boxing, and in a famous story Emmanuel Stewart told, I'm going to tie this one in with Third here, is that when Emmanuel was at a party one night, he always would tell this story. He said, man, I got to go. It's this hot party. Everybody's there, but I got to go home and watch Mike. Mike's on HBO tonight. I got to get home and see Mike fight. So when Emmanuel Stewart left a party to go home and watch Mike Tyson fight, that's saying something.
Yeah.
So what I want to share a story. One of the last times I saw Emmanuel, Mike Tyson and I were in Las Vegas. We were out late one night, and we walked into Piero's restaurant, which in the movie Casino, it's called the Leaning Tower, but in real life, it was Piero's. So it's late at night, restaurant's closed, but who's saying no to Iron Mike, Right. So we walk in, it's me and Mike, and the whole place is empty except at the bar. There's Emmanuel holding court, couple bottles of wine down. You could tell he's telling war stories. He's got a few
shaking and baking.
Gentlemen, that's it. He's talking, and then I said, "Hey, Chief," and he looked up. And Mike kind of looked at me. Mike didn't know where I was going with it because I wasn't with Emmanuel anymore at this time. We were still friends. I still helped them out on a ton of stuff behind the scenes people don't know about. So he goes, "Oh my God, Big John." He's like, "Mike, He comes running over, and he hugs Mike, gives me a hug. He says, "Oh, Mike, man," he starts talking to him about Roderick Moore and the old days in the amateurs. And,
Womack.
Oh, yeah, that's Ricky. So, that's a whole nother podcast.
I know.
So
we'll get there.
They're talking about the old amateur days, So Mike and I go sit down. Emmanuel goes back to his group. And I get back to Detroit, and Emmanuel starts calling me. And I'll never forget where I was. I was in Bloomfield by this golf course driving. And he says, "Big John," he's like, "Man, you got to talk to Mike. You got to get him to come back for one fight." And Emmanuel painted this picture with so much energy through the phone. I'm driving, and I literally had to pull over so I could take this in. It was that powerful of a call. And then, Mike's going to put on the KRONK Gold. He's going to put on them white Mizuno shoes, get rid of them black boots. Manuel didn't like black trunks and black shoes. That was not his thing. Manuel loved white boxing shoes. Anybody, the Mizuno shoe, that's our shoe. So he talked about the white terry cloth robe, and then Mike's going to come down bouncing on his toes, and he's going to be boxing because Mike's got this great jab. You know, people don't understand. He out-jabbed Tony Tucker, and Manuel's going into detail. And I'm like, wow. And I'm caught up in this now. And then all of a sudden reality hit. I'm like, damn, I can't tell Emmanuel, but Mike's trying to get sober right now.
Yeah.
And the world doesn't know about it. But Emmanuel Stewart wanted Mike Tyson to come back and have one more pro fight wearing the KRONK gold. And
That's thank you for sharing that, John. I mean, that's the glory of KRONK Gym. Mike Tyson, Sugar Ray Leonard, Floyd Mayweather was sponsored by KRONK for one tournament in his career. KRONK touched almost everybody. We talked about Tyson Fury, the connection today with Andy Lee being his cousin, a KRONK fighter. We talked about Third training Jake Paul and what's going on with the influencer meets boxer, takes it to another level. I mean, all of these storylines, some of them tragic endings, some of them glorious finishes. It's going to be an amazing documentary. There is a documentary to come. We'll have more updates on it at GOATQuest.com. I'm going to share those updates with KRONK as the KRONK websites come online. I can't thank you all enough. We're sadly out of time. This was a well-produced, mediocrely researched, and excellently presented podcast by you fine gentlemen. Thank you all for joining me on GoQuest. This was a wonderful expo of the KRONK Gym, the greatest fight team of all time.